Imagine walking into a world where the air itself feels heavy with regret, where every step you take is swallowed by an endless fog, and every sound, faint and distant, feels like a memory clawing its way back to the surface. This is Silent Hill, where the true terror isn't just the monsters lurking in the dark, but the ones buried deep within your own mind. The Silent Hill 2 remake doesn't just reintroduce you to its eerie streets and abandoned halls. It forces you to confront your own demons in ways you've never imagined. It's a world where guilt festers, where every step forward feels like a descent into madness, and where the town itself knows your darkest secrets. This isn't just an upgraded version of a beloved classic, it's a psychological autopsy of your soul, as you're dragged into a world where the boundary between reality and nightmare dissolves in the mist, daring you to uncover what you've hidden from yourself. Let's talk about how this chilling reimagining not only breathes new life into a classic, but redefines what modern horror games can achieve. It's not just about updated visuals or technical improvements. This remake taps into the core of what made Silent Hill 2 such a timeless masterpiece in the first place, its ability to get into your skin and make you question everything, from the enhanced emotional weight of the characters to the way the atmosphere pulls you deeper into a twisted reality. This version doesn't just want to scare you, it wants to make you think, to feel, and to confront the uncomfortable truths that linger long after you put the controller down. As we peel back the layers of this remake, we'll see how it pushes the boundaries of horror, turning fear into something more than jump scares, something profoundly psychological, immersive, and ultimately inescapable. The release of Silent Hill 2 Remake couldn't have been timed more perfectly. I didn't even know it was coming out. After spending 100 hours immersed in Space Marine 2, I found myself wanting something slower paced and scarier. That's when I stumbled upon Silent Hill 2 Remake, fresh on the Steam front page. It was right there, and I figured why not. Going into it, I had zero expectations. I had no history with the franchise, no nostalgia to cloud my experience, and no preconceived notions about what it should be. It was just a game with a familiar name in a genre I was curious about. I'll try not to gush too much, but hey, it's my video, so I'm gonna say what I feel. This isn't meant to be a comprehensive story breakdown or an in-depth review. I just want to talk about what makes this game so special. It's a remake of a 23-year-old game, but there are plenty of people like me who are experiencing the story for the first time.
Could Mary really be here? Is she really alive? Waiting for me?
When it comes to the story, Silent Hill 2 Remake doesn't hold your hand. It wants you, the player, to fill in the gaps. Now, I could break down my interpretation of the plot without diving into spoilers, but honestly, giving you a back-of-the-box summary wouldn't do it justice. So, for the next few minutes, we're diving into spoiler territory. If you want to avoid any story spoilers, check the chapters below and skip to the graphics section. I understand many of you may have already experienced the story in the original, and from what I've read in reviews and Reddit threads since beating the game, this remake doesn't stray far from the source material. With that said, here's your spoiler warning, so skip ahead if you want to go in blind. Alright, here's my interpretation of the story so far. In essence, Silent Hill 2 is a story about guilt, repression, and the lengths people will go to avoid facing their own inner demons. It delves into heavy themes like love, loss, and the burden of responsibility, all while dragging players deeper into a nightmarish world that mirrors the darkest parts of the human mind. James Sunderland's journey is both haunting and heartbreaking, but it's not just his story, it's also the story of the characters he meets along the way, each of them dealing with their own traumas. The plot centers around James Sunderland, a man haunted by grief and unresolved trauma. The game kicks off with James receiving a letter from his late wife, Mary, who died 3 years earlier from a terminal illness. The letter beckons him to Silent Hill, a town that was once special to them. But as James searches for Mary, it becomes clear that the town is much more than just a physical place. It's a reflection of his psyche, a fog-covered nightmare that hides not just external horrors, but his own deeply buried truths. Silent Hill itself functions almost like a sentient entity, manifesting the fears, guilts, and anguish of those who enter it. For James, it becomes a twisted purgatory, where every grotesque creature and every unsettling event is a reflection of his psychological torment. The monsters, ranging from disturbing nurses to the iconic Pyramid Head, aren't just random enemies. They symbolize James' repressed guilt and shame. Pyramid Head in particular represents James' desire for punishment, a looming figure reminding him of the sins he's been hiding. Throughout his journey, James encounters other characters drawn to Silent Hill by their own traumas. Angela, Eddie, and Laura serve as mirrors to James, each grappling with their own psychological baggage. Angela, for instance, is a victim of abuse and sees Silent Hill as her personal hell. Eddie, consumed by feelings of inadequacy, driven to violence. Laura, on the other hand, is a child seemingly untouched by the town's horrors. At the heart of the story is James' relationship with Mary. Early on, the player is led to believe that James is searching for Mary out of love and devotion, but as the game unfolds, the dark truth emerges. James was the one who ended Mary's life, suffocating her to ease her suffering. This revelation shatters as James' reality. forcing him to confront the immense guilt he's been suppressing. His journey through Silent Hill becomes a psychological reckoning, a path toward self-awareness and potentially redemption. The multiple endings, ranging from James accepting his guilt and finding peace to succumbing to the darkness of the town, add even more depth to the story. Silent Hill isn't just a monster-filled town, it's a reflection of the inner turmoil of those who are drawn to it. The choices you make throughout the game influence how James' fate unfolds, making each playthrough feel personal and meaningful. The story isn't filled with constant twists and turns, but the revelations it does provide are powerful, reshaping your understanding of the events leading up to those moments. It's a story that rewards players who pay attention, especially those who read the scattered notes and memos left throughout the world. Let's talk about Maria, a key figure in James' psychological journey. She plays a deeply unsettling role, serving as a manifestation of James's subconscious desires and guilts. Maria physically resembles Mary, but her personality is more flirtatious, seductive, and carefree, a stark contrast to the reserved and terminally ill Mary. This duality pulls James in two directions, representing both his idolized memories of Mary and the painful reality of their relationship in her final days. Maria's role in the story reflects James's inner conflict. She embodies his longing for the Mary he loved before her illness, yet she's also a product of Silent Hill, a creation born from James's unresolved guilt. Throughout the game, Maria's repeated deaths at the hand of Pyramid Head force James to relive his trauma, particularly the memory of killing Mary. Each time Maria dies, it's a grotesque reminder of James's past, a cycle of denial and punishment that he can't seem to escape. Her existence deepens the psychological complexity of the story. Maria represents James's desire to forget the pain of Mary's death and retreat into a more pleasant, albeit false, reality. Yet her constant reappearance and following deaths pull him back into the truth. It's only when James confronts his guilt that Maria's hold over him is broken, which ties into the game's overarching theme of facing painful truths. Depending on the choices you make, the game has multiple endings that reflect the kind of person James becomes based on how you play. My two playthroughs led to different endings, and I loved how both felt like a natural conclusion to the decisions I made along the way. It's not a forced morality system, it feels organic and shaped by your interactions and priorities throughout the game. What I love most about the story is how subtle it can be. It never feels like it's hammering you with exposition. Instead, it unfolds naturally through dialogue, environmental storytelling, and the unsettling pieces of lore you find scattered throughout Silent Hill. The characters, the voice acting, and the psychological depth, it all combines to create a narrative that's far more complex than I expected going in. So while I haven't played the original Silent Hill 2, this remake has absolutely hooked me. The story is by far the strongest aspect of the game for me. Every character, from James to the unsettling figures he encounters, becomes more unnerving and layered as the game progresses. I was not expecting to be so emotionally and psychologically drawn into the narrative, but it quickly became the highlight of the entire experience. The way it's presented, through cutscenes, subtle in-game voice lines, and cryptic notes scattered across the world, it's masterfully done. Playing Silent Hill 2 Remake is, simply put, an immersive and engaging experience. James, the protagonist, moves with a sense of weight, but he's responsive, never sluggish. Whether you're navigating the semi-open streets of Silent Hill or the tight, claustrophobic corridors of its many unsettling interiors, the controls feel smooth and intuitive. At no point did exploration feel like a chore. The game adopts that familiar third-person over-the-shoulder survival horror style, reminiscent of the Resident Evil 4 and Dead Space remakes. The tight camera focuses on James with very little peripheral vision, and this narrows even further when engaged with enemies. Every aspect of the game feels deliberately crafted, even if not every moment was flawless. Admittedly, the camera can get tricky in cramped spaces, especially when you're cornered by enemies. It's easy to find yourself backed into a corner, your screen filled with the blur of enemies and James' green jacket frantically swinging your wooden board in an attempt to survive. But honestly, that only added to the chaos and intensity of those moments. Sure, it's not ideal when the camera locks onto a wall while you're being pelted by one enemy and spit on by another from an unseen direction, but somehow it didn't frustrate me. In those moments, I wasn't focused on the camera. I was more concerned with how I let myself get trapped like that in the first place. The world is filled with collectibles, healing drinks, syringes, ammo, and little trinkets like Polaroid photos, but you have to actively seek those things out. During my first playthrough, I was so engrossed in the atmosphere that I searched every nook and cranny, peeking into every car window, rummaging through every cabinet, and smashing open anything I could find. By the end, I was stocked up with a surplus of health and ammo, but the tension never eased. Even with plenty of supplies, I constantly had my guard up, worried about the next encounter. In contrast, my second playthrough was much faster, and I looted only what was immediately accessible. Because of that, I paid the price. By the end, I was dangerously low on health items, and mistakes hurt a lot more. Both playthroughs, though, were equally enjoyable. The game rewards exploration, but it comes with risks. Venturing off the main path into an alley might reward you with ammo and a healing drink, but you'll likely encounter enemies lying in wait. If you aren't careful, you'll burn through more resources than you gain. It's a delicate balance that I haven't seen in many other games where health regeneration or abundant ammo reduces the need for caution. In Silent Hill 2, every bullet counts, and every step feels calculated. The game's arsenal is surprisingly minimal. You quickly acquire a handgun, followed later by a shotgun, and then later a hunting rifle, each more powerful than the last. Healing options are simple too, just drinks and syringes. You'll gather maps, notes, key items for puzzles, and that's about it. There's no gun modification, no upgrades, it's all basic, but it works. This isn't a game about overpowering enemies with firepower. It's about surviving the psychological maze the game throws at you, finding the next clue to solve the puzzle ahead. As I played, I began to recognize the game's rhythm, explore a location, encounter a few enemies, solve a puzzle, then move into a more confined area packed with greater threats. It's a loop that repeats itself the entire game, yet it never feels repetitive. Instead, each new section became something to look forward to, another challenge to solve, more lore to uncover through cryptic, often terrifying notes left behind. Even when I realized the structure, it didn't detract from the experience. It made me eager to progress and see what twisted puzzle the game had in store next. Speaking of puzzles, we should talk about those. I love a good puzzle, and this game delivered some of the best I've ever encountered. Some of the puzzles are downright cryptic, and I can't help but admire the thought that went into crafting them. There's a complexity here that's both challenging and rewarding. Even the simpler puzzles kept me engaged because the process of finding the necessary items was always thrilling, often taking me through areas with lurking enemies ready to spike my heart rate. Speaking of enemies, they're absolutely terrifying. The designs are grotesque, their movements unsettling, and their sounds haunting. Imagine catching a glimpse of a creeper scurrying across the floor from the corner of your camera only to have your attention yanked back to a mannequin posed eerily still in the corner. The game tricks your brain. What seems like part of the environment suddenly lurches to life. The vignette tightens around the screen, and before you know it, the mannequin is moving towards you. Every time it happened, I got goosebumps, followed by a genuine yell of fear. The nurses and the acid-spitting creatures, they're all pulled from a nightmare. Their attack patterns, while learnable, remain unpredictable. I never stopped feeling on edge when engaging with any of the enemies. Combat itself is straightforward, but it's effective. You're not meant to feel like a one-man army. James isn't some trained soldier, he's just an average guy handling a gun with unsteady hands, and that's reflected in how aiming feels. There's a lot of movement and sway, which makes hitting enemies challenging, especially when they're moving erratically through the environment. I found myself reserving my ammo, relying on melee weapons like the wooden board or metal pipe. The stomping mechanic, however, was immensely satisfying. I'd often overdo it, stomping enemies long after they were dead, probably just to reassure myself that they scared the life out of me. While the combat isn't the toughest, it manages to be chaotic and tense. The enemies' unpredictable movements paired with the claustrophobic environments and unnerving sound design create a visceral experience. If someone were to ask me if the combat alone was challenging, I'd probably say no. But when you factor in the oppressive atmosphere, it's a different story. On my first playthrough, the shock value, tension, and psychological weight of the world made every encounter feel significant and scary. The sound design deserves special mention. The music, the ambient noises, and the eerie sound effects all work together to heighten the tension. As you walk through a dim corridor, enemies skitter across the walls and ceilings while your radio static grows louder, signaling their approach. Akira Yamaoka's score is nothing short of haunting. Each track fits perfectly, whether ramping up the tension with booming percussion or pulling back into a slow, haunting melody. Sometimes, the silence was the scariest part, leaving me with the sound of distant moans, creaking chains, and unsettling footsteps. Finally, in sound, the voice acting in the remake is stellar. Jeremy Irvine's portrayal of James is filled with quiet introspection and raw emotion, perfectly capturing his internal struggle. Brianna White masterfully brings both Maria and Mary to life, their contrasting personalities adding depth to the psychological tension. Elizabeth Dulau and Graham Vick round out the cast with equally impactful performances, making each character feel hauntingly real. In the end, all of these elements, the sound design, the puzzles, the enemy encounters, and the sparse, oppressive atmosphere come together to create a world that is genuinely terrifying. The fog-covered streets and dark, claustrophobic hallways make every step feel dangerous. Even in the moments without enemies, the tension never leaves. There's a constant feeling of unease, like the world itself is watching, waiting to strike. Sure, there are jump scares, but they're few and far between. Most of the fear comes from the unnerving atmosphere and the psychological tricks the game plays on you. It's a slow, creeping horror that sticks with you long after you turn the game off. When those rare jump scares do hit, they're genuinely terrifying. Silent Hill 2 Remake doesn't need to rely on cheap scares, it's the world itself that gets under your skin. If you played the original Silent Hill 2, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, especially on how it compares to what we've discussed so far. Since I haven't experienced the original myself, I'm curious about what's changed and what's different. That being said, if you couldn't already tell, this remake has turned me into a huge fan of the series. I'll definitely be diving into the rest of the Silent Hill games, so if that's something you're interested in, hit the subscribe button for more content like this. Visually, Silent Hill 2 Remake is stunning. The town of Silent Hill is shrouded in a thick, oppressive fog, and the game captures this beautifully, creating an eerie atmosphere where visibility is very limited. You'll catch fleeting glimpses of enemies wandering through the fog just out of sight, adding to the tension. The depth of field combined with the volumetric fog works to great effect, drawing you deeper into the world. Indoors, darkness is nearly absolute, with your only source of light coming from a flashlight you find early on. This leaves you with a small cone of vision that highlights the incredibly detailed environments around you, whether you're exploring abandoned apartments or the decaying halls of a dilapidated hospital. The clutter and the layout of every room feels authentic and contributes to the game's sense of immersion. But while the game's visuals are breathtaking, my experience playing on PC was unfortunately marred by technical issues. Despite having hardware more than capable of running the game, I encountered frequent stuttering while moving through the world, issues with frame time, and frustrating frame drops. These problems seem to stem from the game being built on Unreal Engine 5, and it's something many players on PC are dealing with. It's a real shame because these performance issues detract from what is otherwise an incredible experience. Every play session had me tweaking my settings in an attempt to optimize performance, but what seemed to work in one area of the game might cause massive problems in another. Eventually, I turned to mods to help smooth out the experience. These mods helped optimize the game without sacrificing graphical fidelity while improving the performance, and they did help, at least for a while. I started using them in the final third of the game or so, but even with these fixes, some of the last sections of the game, especially one critical cutscene, still dropped to 10 to 20 frames per second. It was a frustrating contrast. When the game ran well, it could hit a consistent 120 frames per second, but when it struggled, the frame rate would plummet, pulling me out of the experience at crucial moments. One major section of the game was particularly rough. I had to play it at 50% resolution scale with DLSS on performance mode at 1080p just to keep the frame rate above 45 frames per second. It was hard not to laugh at how jarring it looked, and it pulled me out of what should have been a pretty pivotal moment for one of the supporting characters in the game. If the game had been optimized properly, I could have stayed in the moment instead of being distracted by technical issues. That said, the game's art direction and style are phenomenal. The environments, the character designs, enemies, and item details are all beautifully crafted, and like the music, they elevate the overall experience. The attention to detail is impressive, and it's clear that the visual elements are a huge part of what makes this game so engaging. I have no doubt that patches and additional mods will improve performance over time, but for those of us who played at launch, these issues were a significant downside. I'm curious to know what platform everybody else played on, and how the experience was. I'm interested to know how the PS5 runs the game, so let me know in the comments down below. I've covered a lot in this video, and I could easily go on for much longer, diving deeper into the story or breaking down every system the game offers. But as I said at the start, this isn't meant to be a detailed analysis. It's more of a love letter. I absolutely loved this game. The story, the gameplay, and the atmosphere, and the world all came together in such a beautiful, haunting way that I'm sure it'll stick with me for a long time. Like I mentioned earlier, I usually have to be in the right mood to play horror games or watch scary movies, but Silent Hill 2 Remake didn't just scratch that itch. It opened me up to the entire Silent Hill universe. I feel compelled to dive into the other games in this series because if the stories are anything like this one, it'll be worth every second. Playing this remake has even got me thinking about going back and experiencing the original Silent Hill 2 to see firsthand the game that started it all. And honestly, if Konami continues down this path of redemption, remaking these classics for a new generation, I'm all for it. I'm Drew, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've played Silent Hill 2 Remake, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. How did you enjoy it? If you liked this video, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out a lot. There's more Silent Hill content on the way, along with other great stuff. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.